The relentless flames devoured everything in their path, turning the Montana prairie into a hellscape of smoke and terror. Sarah Mitchell clutched her feverish baby closer, knowing these might be their final moments together. The fire had trapped them in their small homestead, and with each passing second, hope slipped away like sand through trembling fingers. That's when he appeared, a silhouette against the inferno, a cowboy who chose to ride straight into death's jaws. What happened next would become legend in these parts, a tale of courage that sparked an unexpected love story on the untamed frontier. But as Sarah would soon discover, her mysterious rescuer carried scars far deeper than those left by the flames. Could a man running from his past find redemption in the very fire he fought? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Earlier that morning, Sarah Mitchell had watched the sunrise paint the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose, unaware that by nightfall those same colors would signal destruction. The homestead was quiet, except for Emma's labored breathing and the occasional crackle from the hearth, where Sarah kept her medicinal herbs brewing. She touched the locket at her throat, thumb tracing the familiar shape that held Thomas's portrait. 8 months since the fever had taken him, leaving her alone with their newborn daughter and 20 acres of stubborn earth that demanded more than a grieving widow could give. "Just hold on, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, adjusting the hand-knit blanket around Emma's tiny form. The blanket was Sarah's first and only attempt at knitting. Thomas had teased her about the uneven stitches, but she'd persisted, determined their child would have something made by her mother's hands. Now those imperfect rows of wool were damp with her baby's sweat, as Emma fought against a fever that seemed to climb with each passing hour. Sarah dipped a cloth in cool water, pressing it gently against Emma's forehead. The baby's skin burned beneath her touch, those usually bright eyes now glassy and unfocused. 3 days of this, and nothing seemed to help. Not the willow bark tea, not the cool compresses, not the desperate prayers Sarah whispered into the dark each night. Through the window, she caught movement in the distance, a herd of deer bounding across the prairie, heading east. Strange to see them moving at this hour, and in such numbers. Sarah frowned, rising from her rocking chair. To get a better look, that's when she saw it. A faint haze on the western horizon that shouldn't have been there. Her heart stuttered. Wildfire. She'd heard the warnings at church last Sunday, how dry the summer had been, how a single spark could set the prairie. A blaze. But the danger had seemed distant then, theoretical. Now, watching that smudge of smoke grow darker against the morning sky, theory became terrifying reality. "Lord, give me strength," she breathed, clutching her locket. The prayer came automatically, the same words she'd repeated like a lifeline since Thomas's death. But there was no time for prayer now, only action. Sarah gathered Emma into her arms, the blanket trailing like a banner as she moved through the cabin with purposeful steps. Her mind raced through what she needed: water, food, medicines for Emma, but before she could reach for any of it, a gust of hot wind rattled the windows with such force that Emma startled awake, her weak cry piercing the air. "Shh, my love," Sarah soothed, even as her own panic rose. The smoke was thicker now, seeping through the cabin's imperfect seals. They needed to leave, immediately. But with Emma so sick, where could they go? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles east. The town, twice that distance. Even if she could manage the journey on foot while carrying Emma, the fire might outpace them. The cabin's door burst open, propelled by another hot gust that sent embers swirling into the room like angry fireflies. Sarah's decision was made for her. Clutching Emma closer, she grabbed the water canteen hanging by the door and stepped out into what had become an alien landscape. The prairie she'd known, golden grass rippling like waves under an endless sky, was transforming before her. Eyes. Smoke turned the morning sun into a baleful red eye, and the wind that had once carried the sweet scent of sage now brought only ash and the acrid smell of burning earth. Sarah turned east, shielding Emma's face against her shoulder. They would make for the creek that cut through Anderson's property, if they could reach it. But even as the thought formed, a wall of flame erupted on the horizon, cutting off their escape route. The fire was moving faster than she'd imagined. Possible, feeding on the dry grass, creating its own wind that drove it ever onward. Turning south offered no better option. More flames, more smoke. With growing horror, Sarah realized they were being encircled. The fire was herding them back toward the cabin like a predator cornering its prey. Inside again, Sarah tried to think through her rising terror. The root cellar. It wasn't much, but its earthen walls might offer some protection. She had just started toward the trapdoor when a horrifying crack split the air. Through the window, she watched as their old oak tree, the one Thomas had hung a swing from in anticipation of their child, burst into flames like a massive torch. Emma whimpered in her arms, the sound barely audible over the fire's roar. Sarah looked down at her baby's flushed face, at the blanket she'd knitted with so much hope, and felt tears cut tracks through the soot on her cheeks. Was this how it would end? Not with the slow agony of fever, but in a blaze that would leave nothing behind, not even bones for burying. "I'm so sorry, my sweet girl," she whispered, rocking Emma gently. "Your papa would have known what to do." He always knew. The roof timbers groaned ominously overhead. Sarah sank down in the corner furthest from the windows, wrapping Emma's blanket more securely around her tiny form. As the smoke thickened and the world burned around them, she did the only thing left to do. She prayed, not for herself, but for her child, for some miracle that would spare Emma, even if Sarah herself was lost. That's when she heard it. The impossible sound of hoofbeats approaching through the inferno. At first, Sarah thought the smoke had addled her mind. No sane person would ride into this inferno. But the hoofbeats grew louder, more insistent, until they resolved into a massive black horse that materialized from the flames like a creature from legend. Its rider, silhouetted against the burning sky, sat tall in a saddle that would later bear the scars of this day. He dismounted in one fluid motion, this stranger whose features she couldn't make out through the smoke. His voice, though, cut through the fire's roar with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, we need to go, now." Sarah clutched Emma tighter. "My baby, she's sick, the fever. Then we'll get her to a doctor." He moved closer, and now she could see. His face, young but weathered, with eyes that held both kindness and something harder, deeper. "But first we have to survive this fire." A tremendous crash from outside punctuated his words as another tree succumbed to the flames. The stranger's horse whinnied nervously but held its ground, trained to trust its master even in hell itself. "I'm James," he said, already shrugging out of his duster coat, "and I'm going to wrap you both in this. It won't stop the heat completely, but it might keep the worst of the sparks off." His movements were quick but careful as he draped the heavy leather around Sarah and Emma, creating a protective cocoon. The coat smelled of horse and leather and wood smoke, but underneath there was something else, a trace of something clean and wild, like sage after rain. Sarah found herself drawing strength from that scent, from this stranger's steady presence. "The saddle horn's wrapped in wet leather," James explained, leading her toward his horse. "Hold on to it tight. Don't let go no matter what happens." He helped her mount, adjusting the coat to keep Emma protected between them. The baby had grown eerily quiet, but Sarah could feel her shallow breathing against her chest. James swung up behind them, his arms creating a protective cage around Sarah and Emma as he gathered the reins. The horse shifted beneath them, muscles bunching with nervous energy. "Close your eyes," James instructed, his breath warm against her ear. "And if you're the praying type, now would be a good time." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, just as James spurred the horse forward. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, like being plunged into a forge. She could feel the horse's powerful stride, hear James murmuring encouragement to both mount and riders, but everything else dissolved into a chaos of noise and heat and terror. They burst through a wall of flame. She felt the horse gather itself and leap, felt James's arms tighten around her, heard him grunt as sparks showered down on his unprotected back. The horse's hooves struck earth again, and they were running through an apocalyptic landscape where the very air seemed to burn. Time lost meaning. Sarah's world narrowed to the sound of the horse's labored breathing, the steady rhythm of its stride, the solid presence of the man behind her, and the precious bundle held tight against her chest. She didn't dare open her eyes, didn't dare do anything but pray and hold on. The horse stumbled once, righting itself immediately, but the motion sent waves of pain through Sarah's terror-tensed muscles. James's voice cut through her panic. Almost. There, hold on. Almost there. She didn't know how he could tell where there was in this inferno, but she chose to trust him. What other choice did she have? The air changed first, still hot, still smoke-filled, but somehow fresher. The horse's stride lengthened, became more sure. And then, miracle of miracles, she felt cool drops of water against her face. "You can. Open your eyes now, Mum," Sarah did, blinking against the sting of smoke and tears. They were in a shallow creek, steam rising where the water met their heat-baked bodies. The fire still raged, but at a distance now, its roar muted by the blessed sound of running water. James's horse stood trembling in the creek, sides heaving, sweat and water dripping from its flanks. The saddle horn, where Sarah's hands still gripped desperately, was charred black. The wet leather wrapping burned away to reveal the scarred wood beneath. "Emma," Sarah gasped, suddenly terrified that their wild ride had been too much for her sick baby. But when she pulled back the coat and blanket, Emma's eyes were open, watching her with a clarity that had been missing for days. The cool air seemed to have done what days of compresses and herbs could not. "Thank you," Sarah breathed, looking up at James. "Thank you for—" The words died in her throat. In the clearer air, she could see him properly for the first time, and see the blood soaking through his shirt, where sparks and burning branches had struck his unprotected back. "Don't thank me yet," he said grimly. "We're not safe until we reach town, and this fire's still got some fight in it." He gathered the reins again, guiding the horse downstream. "Hold on tight, Mum. We've got a ways to go." As they moved through the water, Sarah found herself studying his profile, trying to understand what would drive a man to ride into an inferno to save strangers. There was something in the set of his jaw, the shadows in his eyes, that suggested he was running from something far more dangerous than fire, but those were questions for later. For now, she held her baby close, breathing in the blessed cool air, and sent up silent prayers of gratitude for this mysterious savior who had appeared just when all hope seemed lost. Doc Wilson's house sat on the outskirts of Silver Creek, its white clapboard walls and wraparound porch a beacon of hope to those in need. Tonight, lamplight spilled from every window, the doctor clearly awake and alert to the crisis unfolding. Across the prairie, the old physician burst through his front door before James could even help Sarah dismount. His weathered hands reached for Emma immediately, professional concern overriding any need for pleasantries. "Bring her inside," he ordered, already turning back toward the house. The doctor's black medical bag sat ready on his examining table, its worn leather surfaces reflecting decades of similar emergencies. "Martha," he called to his wife, "water and clean linens." Sarah followed him into the familiar examining room, her legs trembling from the ride and lingering terror. Behind her, she heard James's boots on the porch steps, then a muffled grunt of pain that he tried to hide. "Both of you sit," Doc Wilson commanded, laying Emma gently on the examining table. "Martha will see to your burns while I tend to this little one." Martha Wilson appeared with an efficiency born of long practice, her arms full of clean cloths and a steaming kettle. She took one look at James's back and clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Shirt off," she ordered, every inch the doctor's wife who'd helped treat half the county's ailments over the years. When James hesitated, she fixed him with a stern look. "Young man, I've raised 6 boys and nursed more cowboys than I can count. Your modesty isn't worth an infection." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips as he carefully peeled off his ruined shirt, revealing angry red burns across his shoulders and back. Sarah gasped softly. The damage was worse than she'd feared. "Shush, baby first," James insisted, even as Martha began cleaning his wounds. "I've had worse." Sarah wanted to protest, to insist that his injuries needed immediate attention, but Emma had started crying, a stronger, clearer sound than she'd made in days. Doc Wilson was already at work, his experienced hands gentle as he examined the "Baby, fever's breaking," he announced after a moment. "Whatever you did, it seems to have shocked her system in just the right way." He reached for his bag, producing a small glass bottle. "We'll give her something to help it along, but I suspect the worst is past." Relief made Sarah's knees buckle. She sank into a nearby chair, watching as the doctor administered medicine to Emma with practiced ease. Her baby's color was better already, the frightening glassiness gone from her eyes. "Now," Doc Wilson said, turning to Sarah while Martha continued treating James, "tell me exactly what happened." Sarah recounted their ordeal, her voice shaking only slightly. As she spoke, she couldn't help glancing at James, who sat silently enduring Martha's ministrations. In the bright lamplight, she could see details she'd missed before. A thin scar along his jaw, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to pain, the careful way his eyes tracked exits and entrances. "The fire's still coming," James said. When Sarah finished her tale, "Town should be safe. The creek and the cleared fields should stop it, but there will be others needing help before morning." "Then you'll be staying right here," Martha declared, applying a final bandage to his back. "You're in no condition to go charging back out there." A shadow crossed James's face. "I shouldn't. You should, and you will," Doc Wilson cut in. "At least until I'm certain those burns won't fester. Besides," he added with a knowing look, "seems to me you've earned a rest." James subsided, though Sarah noticed how he positioned his chair to keep both the door and windows in view. What sort of life taught a man such habits? Emma had drifted into peaceful sleep, her breathing finally easy. Doc Wilson carefully wrapped her in a fresh blanket and handed her back to Sarah. "Keep her warm and quiet," he instructed. "I'll mix up something for those smoke-scorched lungs of yours as well." Martha bustled out to prepare rooms, leaving Sarah alone with James and the sleeping baby. In the relative quiet, broken only by the distant sound of fire wagons racing past, Sarah studied her rescuer more carefully. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Ride into that inferno for strangers?" James was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Maybe," he said finally, "I needed to prove something to myself." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Martha returned with hot tea and stern instructions for rest. But as she followed the older woman to the prepared guest room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd glimpsed something significant in James's response, a pain that had nothing to do with his burned back. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him. "Thank you," she said again, "not just for saving us, but for risking everything to do it." James met her eyes briefly, and in that moment, Sarah saw both darkness and light warring in his gaze. "Get some rest, Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Indeed it would, Sarah thought as she settled into the spare room with Emma. Tomorrow would bring questions about her burned homestead, about rebuilding, about survival. But for now, she had her baby. They were safe, and somewhere in the darkness of the fire's destruction, she'd found an unexpected light. Dawn crept over Silver Creek, revealing a world transformed. Ash drifted like grey snow, coating the town's wooden sidewalks and storefronts. The air still tasted of smoke, though the worst of the fire had moved on, leaving destruction in its wake. Sarah stood on Doc Wilson's porch, cradling a sleeping Emma and watching the steady stream of wagons bringing in those who'd fled the flames. Each new arrival made her heart clench, wondering how many had lost everything as she likely had. Movement caught her eye. James, despite Martha's protests, was helping unload supplies from a wagon. His bandaged back must have been painful, but his face betrayed nothing as he worked. There was something admirable in that quiet strength, that determination to help despite his own injuries. Sheriff Taylor's arrival interrupted her thoughts. The lawman dismounted wearily, his usually pristine badge dulled with ash. He nodded to Sarah before approaching James, speaking in low tones that didn't quite reach the porch. Whatever was said made James stiffen. He glanced towards Sarah, and, even at this distance, she could see the conflict in his expression. Then he followed the sheriff into the telegraph office, leaving Sarah with a growing sense of unease. "Penny for your thoughts?" Martha appeared beside her, holding a fresh cup of coffee. Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Just wondering about our mysterious savior. Aren't we all?" Martha's tone was knowing. She hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. "Found this when I was cleaning the sheriff's office last night. Probably shouldn't show you, but—" She handed Sarah what turned out to be a wanted poster, dated 3 years ago. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded. The sketch wasn't perfect, but the resemblance was unmistakable. James's strong jaw, those haunted eyes. The name read James Carson, and beneath it, wanted for questioning in connection with the death of Clayton Reed, prominent rancher. Approach with caution. 3 years is a long time, Martha said softly. People change. Or maybe they just run far enough, Sarah murmured, unable to reconcile the man who'd risked his life to save her and Emma with someone wanted for murder. The telegraph office door opened. James emerged alone, his expression carefully neutral until he saw the paper in Sarah's hands. Something flickered in his eyes, resignation perhaps, or a deeper pain. He approached slowly, like a man walking to judgment. "Suppose you'll be wanting an explanation." "Do you owe me one?" Sarah asked, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Maybe not, but you trusted me with your life and your child's. Seems like you deserve the truth." Martha quietly retreated inside, leaving them alone on the porch. James leaned against the railing, his back to the street, every line of his body tense with unspoken history. "Clayton Reed was my employer," he began, his voice low. "Had us spread up near Helena. Wasn't a kind man, but the work was steady. Until I caught him beating one of the young stable hands, a boy no more than 12. He paused, working his jaw. I intervened. Things got heated. Reed pulled a gun, and in the struggle, his hands clenched on the railing. The boy testified it was self-defense, but Reed's family had money, influence. Sometimes the truth matters less than who's telling it. So you ran." "So I ran." He turned to face her finally. "Been running ever since, taking odd jobs, moving on before anyone asks too many questions. Until last night, when I saw the fire and heard about a woman and baby trapped." He shook his head. "Couldn't run from that." Sarah looked down at Emma, remembering the terror of those flames, the miracle of James's appearance. "The sheriff," she said, "will he—" "Wire's already gone out to Helena. They'll send someone to investigate, verify my story. Sheriff Taylor's willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, given the circumstances." The wanted poster crinkled in Sarah's grip. Such a simple piece of paper, yet it held the power to destroy the fragile trust building between them. She made her decision, tearing the poster in half. "The man on this paper," she said quietly, "wouldn't have ridden into an inferno to save strangers, wouldn't have risked his freedom to help others after we were safe." She met his gaze steadily. "That man isn't who you are anymore." Something shifted in James's expression, surprise, relief, and something deeper that made Sarah's heart beat faster. Before he could respond, Emma stirred, whimpering softly. "She needs changing," Sarah said, suddenly flustered by the intensity of his gaze. "And you should let Martha check those bandages." James nodded, stepping aside to let her pass, but as she reached the door, he spoke again. "Sarah?" She turned, struck by the raw honesty in his voice. "Thank you for seeing more than what's on in that poster." Sarah smiled softly. "Thank you for being more." 3 days after the fire, Sarah stood in Martha Wilson's herb garden, breathing in the clean scent of rosemary and sage. The small plot had survived the flames, protected by the house's stone foundation and Martha's diligent watering. Now it offered a rare patch of green amid the ash-stained landscape. "Yarrow for healing," Martha explained, showing Sarah how to cut the delicate white flowers. "Lavender for sleep. And this," she pointed to a sturdy plant with purple blooms, "is echinacea, good for building strength." Sarah gathered the herbs carefully, adding them to her basket. Emma lay nearby on a quilt, cooing at butterflies that somehow still found their way to the flowers. Her fever had broken completely, leaving her stronger than she'd been in weeks. "The gardens saved my sanity after we lost our Jacob," Martha said quietly, pinching back dead leaves from a thyme plant. "Something about watching things grow, helping them heal. It reminds you that life goes on." Sarah thought of her own homestead, of the scorched earth where her garden had been. "How do you start over when everything's gone?" "One seed at a time, dear." Martha pressed a packet of seeds into Sarah's hand. "Speaking of which, your cowboy's been asking about building materials." "He's not my cowboy," Sarah protested automatically, though her cheeks warmed. Martha's knowing smile spoke volumes. "Well, whoever's cowboy he is, he's got half the town organized to help rebuild the homesteads that were lost, starting with yours." Sarah looked up sharply. "But his injuries are healing well, though he's more stubborn than my old mule about resting." Martha bent to pick some mint, its fresh scent rising sharp and clean. "That man's carrying more than just physical scars, but I've noticed he seems lighter when he's around you and Emma." As if summoned by her name, Emma let out a delighted squeal. Sarah turned to see James approaching the garden, his shirt dark with honest sweat rather than blood now. He moved carefully, mindful of his healing back, but his smile came easier than it had days ago. "Mrs. Wilson," he nodded to Martha. "Sarah." Her name sounded different on his lips, like something precious. "Just came to let you know we've salvaged some lumber from the old Miller place, with their permission, of course, enough to make a start on rebuilding." "You don't have to," Sarah began. "I want to," he interrupted gently. "If you'll let me." Martha suddenly found urgent business. Inside, leaving them alone in the garden's peaceful sanctuary, James knelt beside Emma, who immediately reached for him with tiny, grasping hands. "She's looking better," he observed, letting the baby catch his finger. "Thanks to you." Sarah watched them together, something warm unfurling in her chest. "We both are." James was quiet for a moment, absently letting Emma play with his hand. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about stopping." "Stopping?" "Running." He met her eyes. "Sheriff Taylor received a wire from Helena yesterday. The stable boy. He's a man now. He's willing to testify again. Says he's been carrying the guilt of staying quiet when I left." Sarah's heart beat faster. "What does that mean?" "Means there might be a chance to clear my name. Properly this time." He looked around the garden, at the new growth pushing through soil that knew both nurture and hardship. "Maybe it's time to plant some roots instead of running from shadows." The packet of seeds crinkled in Sarah's hand. Such a small thing, yet it held the promise of tomorrow, of growth, of healing. "It won't be easy," she said softly. "Rebuilding, starting over. Nothing worth doing ever is." James gently disentangled his finger from Emma's grip. "But I've learned something these past few days, watching folks come together after the fire. Sometimes the hardest storms bring out the best in people. Sometimes what looks like an ending is just a different kind of beginning." Sarah thought of her own new beginning, born in fire and fear, but blossoming into something unexpected and precious. "Then I suppose we'd better get started," she said, holding out the packet of seeds. The newspaper clipping slipped from a stack of old mail Martha was sorting, yellowed and creased but still legible. Sarah wouldn't have noticed it if Emma hadn't knocked over the pile while crawling across the parlor floor, scattering papers. Everywhere, "Prominent rancher dead in mysterious circumstances," the headline screamed. Below it, a detailed account painted a very different picture than the one James had shared. The article spoke of missing money, of suspicious circumstances, of a drifter who'd vanished into the night. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. According to the Helena Daily Chronicle, Clayton Reed had been found with more than just injuries. From a struggle. The safe in his study had been empty, its contents never recovered, and James Carson had disappeared the same night, along with nearly $10,000. "Oh, Lord!" Martha's soft exclamation made Sarah look up. The older woman stood in the doorway, her face drawn with concern. "I'd forgotten about that article. Sarah, you should know." "Know what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. "That the man I've been trusting with my child might be a thief as well as a killer. That newspapers don't always tell the whole truth." Martha sat beside her, gathering Emma into her lap. "And that 3-year-old articles rarely show who someone is today." Before Sarah could respond, the front door opened. James stood there, his arms full of building supplies, his face falling as he took in the scene. His eyes fixed on the newspaper in Sarah's hands, and something like resignation settled over his features. "Suppose you'll want the full story now," he said quietly. Sarah stood, putting distance between them. "Is there more to tell or just more lies?" Pain flashed across his face. "I've never lied to you, Sarah, but there are things I didn't say, things I'm not proud of. Like stealing $10,000, like being too much of a coward to stay and fight." He set down the supplies, his movements careful, deliberate. "Yes, the money was missing. No, I didn't take it. But I ran anyway, because I knew how it would look, because running was easier than trying to prove my innocence against the Reed family's influence." "Then where did the money go?" James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to know well. Reed kept 2 sets of books, one for the bank, one for his less legitimate dealings. That night after the struggle, I found letters, evidence that he'd been cheating his workers, demanding kickbacks from their pay. The stable boy's family had been threatened when they couldn't pay. And the missing money was probably taken by whoever Reed was working with. But I was the convenient scapegoat, the drifter with no roots, no connections. He met her eyes. "I'm not proud of running, but I was young, scared, thought if I just got far enough away." "But you never did you?" Sarah's voice softened despite herself. "Get far enough away?" "No. Turns out you can't outrun who you are, or who you want to be." He took a tentative step forward. "These past weeks, helping rebuild, being here with you and Emma, it's shown me that maybe there's more courage in staying than in running." Sarah looked down at the article again, at the harsh accusations that seemed at odds with the man who'd risked his life to save them. "Why didn't you tell me all of this before?" "Because I wanted you to know who I am now, not who I was then." "Because," he hesitated, vulnerability raw in his voice, "because the way you look at me, like I'm someone worth believing in, I didn't want to lose that." Emma chose that moment to crawl toward James, her small face lighting up as it always did in his presence. He knelt to meet her, and Sarah watched as her daughter patted his cheek with complete trust. "The stable boy," Sarah said finally. "You said he's willing to testify?" "Yes, and this time I'm not running. Whatever happens, I'm facing it. I owe that to myself, to you and Emma, to the man I want to be." Sarah studied him, this complicated man who'd saved them from fire only to risk being burned himself by the truth. The newspaper article crinkled in her grip, and slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. "Then we face it together," she said quietly. "But no more secrets, James, no more running." He stood, Emma cradled in one arm, hope dawning in his eyes. "No more running," he agreed softly. "Martha, who'd been silent throughout their exchange, quietly gathered the torn newspaper. "Well," she said with gentle authority, "seems to me that's enough dwelling on the past for one day. Those building supplies won't unload themselves." James handed Emma back to Sarah, their fingers brushing, in a touch that held promise and forgiveness both. As he turned to his work, Sarah watched him go, understanding now that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop running and face the truth of who they are and who they might become. The skeleton of Sarah's new home rose from the blackened earth, each beam and board a testament to the community's generosity. James worked alongside the other men, his movements more fluid now as his burns healed. From her spot in the shade where she was preparing lunch for the workers, Sarah watched him pause to wipe sweat from his brow, then reach for something in his shirt pocket. It was the small wooden horse he'd carved for Emma, barely larger than his palm. He'd worked on it late into the night, his knife carefully shaping the crude block of wood into something that made Emma's eyes light up with wonder. Now he used it to distract her whenever she fussed in her makeshift playpen near the construction. "See, there, little lady," he'd say, making the horse prance through the air. "Soon you'll have a real one of your own." The simple toy had become more than just a plaything. It was a promise of permanence, of tomorrow, of a life being built piece by piece. Sarah stood, brushing dust from her apron. "Lunch is ready," she called, and the men set down their tools gratefully. James hung back, letting the others go first, and Sarah found herself studying the changes in him. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes was fading, replaced by something steadier. He moved differently too, like a man who'd set down a heavy burden. Word had come from Helena yesterday. The stable boy's new testimony had been formally recorded, and the investigation into Reed's dealings was being reopened. "Smells wonderful," James said, accepting the plate she offered. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. These small touches had become more frequent, each one a tiny bridge across the distance that secrets had carved between them. "Martha sent fresh bread," Sarah replied, suddenly aware of how close they stood, "and Mrs. Johnson brought preserves. The whole town's been more than kind. They remember who rode into the fire that night." She met his eyes. "Who stayed to help rebuild?" James was quiet for a moment, watching Emma play with the wooden horse. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about after the house is finished." Sarah's heart skipped. They hadn't spoken of the future, not directly. Everything between them felt both fragile and inevitable, like spring ice just beginning to thaw. "What about it?" she asked when the silence stretched too long. "That stable of yours will need rebuilding too, and Emma's going to need someone to teach her to ride once she's big enough." He spoke carefully, each word weighted with meaning. "Thought maybe, if you were willing, I know a man who'd like to help with that." Sarah's breath caught. This wasn't just an offer of help. It was an offering of himself, of a future where running was no longer necessary. Before she could respond, Emma let out a delighted squeal. The wooden horse had slipped from her grasp, and she was determinedly crawling toward it. But instead of reaching for the toy, she pushed herself upright, swaying on uncertain legs. "Sarah," James breathed, his hand finding hers. "Look." Together, they watched as Emma took her first wobbling step, then another. The toy horse waited just out of reach, but their daughter, and when had she become their daughter in Sarah's heart? Ndu was focused only on the joy of movement, of progress, of becoming. 3 steps, then 4. On the 5th, she tumbled forward, but James was already there, scooping her up as she giggled. The wooden horse lay forgotten in the dust as Emma patted, his face with tiny hands that held no memory of fear or fire or loss. "I think," Sarah said softly, watching them together, "that Emma would like that very much, having someone to teach her about horses and other things." James looked at her over Emma's dark curls, hope dawning in his eyes. "And her mama?" Her mama thinks, Sarah moved closer, letting her hand rest on his arm, that some things are worth building slowly, worth doing right. Around them, the framework of their new home rose steady and strong, each beam a promise of shelter, of belonging, of love, growing like wildflowers from the ashes of what was lost. Emma reached for the wooden horse, and James bent to retrieve it, keeping one arm securely around her. The small family stood together in the shadow of their rising home, and Sarah realized that sometimes the sweetest gifts come disguised as endings. A fire that destroys, a past that haunts, a stranger who rides out of the flames and straight into your heart. Some things, she was learning, had to burn before they could bloom. The telegraph arrived on a Tuesday morning, its seemingly innocent paper carrying words that would shatter their hard-won peace. Sarah was at the general store when Billy, the telegraph operator's son, came running in with the yellow slip clutched in his hand. "For Mr. Carson," he announced importantly. "Pa says it's urgent." James took the message, his face darkening as he read. Sarah, who'd been selecting fabric for Emma's new dress, felt her heart stutter at his expression. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Instead of answering, he handed her the telegram. The words were brief, but chilling. "Read, brother heading your way. Seeking revenge, not justice, armed and dangerous. Sheriff Taylor, Helena. Thomas Reed," James explained, his voice tight. "Clayton's younger brother. Always was the volatile one." Sarah's hands trembled, crumpling the telegram's edge. "But the investigation, the stable boy's testimony, won't matter to Thomas. He's not interested in the truth." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as frustration warring with fear. "He was in Mexico when Clayton died. Guess he's finally decided to come settle accounts." The store's usual bustle seemed suddenly muted, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them and this piece of paper that threatened everything they'd built. "What do we do?" James's eyes met hers, and she saw the battle there, the instinct to run warring with his promise to stay, to face whatever came. "I won't bring trouble to your door," he said softly. "Not with Emma to think of." "Our door," Sarah corrected firmly. "Our home, our life together." She stepped closer, laying a hand on his arm. "You promised no more running. This is different. Thomas Reed, he won't stop until he finds me. And he won't care who gets hurt along the way." The telegram crinkled in Sarah's grip as she remembered another piece of paper that had threatened their happiness. The newspaper article that had led to truth, to understanding, to a deeper trust. "Then we face him together," she said. "The whole town will stand with us. You're not alone anymore, James." Before he could respond, the store's door burst open. Sheriff Wilson strode in, his face grave. "Just got word from the stage depot in Carson City," he announced without preamble. "Thomas Reed was there 3 days ago, asking questions. He's coming, James." "How many with him?" "Reports say 2 others. Hard cases by all accounts." James nodded, already calculating. "How long?" 2 days, maybe 3, depending on their pace. The sheriff's badge caught the morning light, a reminder of law and order in a world that sometimes honored neither. Sarah watched as the 2 men fell into discussion of preparations, of strategies, of the best way to protect the town from the coming storm. This was what James had been running from, not just his past, but the violence that seemed to follow it like a shadow. Yet as she listened to them plan, Sarah realized something important. For the first time, James wasn't facing this alone. She thought of their half-built home, of Emma's first steps, of the life they were creating from the ashes of what was lost. They'd survive fire together. They would survive this too. "I'll warn the others," Sheriff Wilson was saying. "Get everyone prepared." "No." James's voice was firm. "We keep this quiet for now. No need to frighten the whole town." "James," Sarah interjected, "they deserve to know. These are good people. They'll help." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "That's what I'm afraid of. I won't have anyone else risking their lives for my past." "Some things are worth the risk," she said quietly. "You taught me that the night you rode into the fire." The telegram lay between them on the counter, its warning clear but no longer devastating. They had survived flame and fear, secrets and truth. Whatever storm was coming, they would weather it together. 2 days, James said finally. 2 days to prepare, to plan, to make sure everyone stays safe. Sheriff Wilson nodded grimly. I'll send word to the neighboring towns. And James, he clasped the younger man's shoulder, this time you've got more than just yourself to fight for. Sarah watched the men leave, their boots raising small clouds of dust on the wooden sidewalk. The telegram remained on the counter, a harbinger of trouble to come. But this time, she realized they had something Thomas Reed didn't. A community united, a love worth fighting for, and the strength that comes from facing your fears instead of running from them. That evening, James stood in the doorway of their partially built home, his gun belt heavy in his hands. The worn leather told its own story, of years on the run, of a past he'd tried to leave behind. Now it seemed that past was demanding one final reckoning. You don't have to wear it, Sarah said softly from behind him. She'd just put Emma to bed in their temporary shelter nearby, the baby's peaceful breathing, a reminder of everything at stake. Yes, I do. He turned the belt over, examining the holster's smooth surface. But not for the reason Thomas Reed thinks. Sarah moved closer, laying a hand on his arm. What do you mean? He's coming here expecting to find the same man who ran 3 years ago. Someone who solved problems with a gun, who chose the easy way out. James looked up, meeting her eyes. But that's not who I am anymore. This, he lifted the gun belt, isn't about fighting. It's about protecting what matters. The distinction seemed to settle something in him. With deliberate movements, he buckled on the belt, adjusting it to sit comfortably at his hip. The weapon's weight was familiar, but it felt different now. Like a shield rather than a sword. The house will be finished in a week, he said, looking around at the half-completed walls. Just in time for Emma's first birthday? James, Sarah's voice held a warning note. Don't talk like you're not going to be here for it. He turned to her fully then, taking her hands in his. I promise you, Sarah Mitchell, I intend to be here. For every birthday, every first step, every moment, big and small. But first, I need to make sure Thomas Reed can never threaten our family again. Our family, she repeated softly, the words still new enough to make her heart skip. Yes, he smiled, touching her cheek. The family I never knew I needed, until I rode through fire to find it. A sound from the temporary shelter made them both turn. Emma had awakened, her small whimpers quickly building towards stronger protests. I'll get her, James said, already moving. Sarah watched as he lifted their daughter, his movements gentle despite the gun at his hip. Emma immediately quieted, snuggling into his chest with complete trust. The sight brought tears to Sarah's eyes. This man who'd once run from his past, now standing firm, holding their future in his arms. Whatever came next, she knew with bone deep certainty that James Carson would move heaven and earth to protect this precious life they'd built. We should get some rest, she said finally. Tomorrow we'll be busy. James nodded, still swaying slightly with Emma. Sheriff Wilson's organizing. Watches. The town's behind us, even though I tried to talk them out of it. Of course they are. You saved more than just us that night, James. You showed everyone what real courage looks like. He looked down at Emma, now sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. Courage isn't about not being afraid, he said quietly. It's about knowing what's worth being afraid for. Sarah stepped closer, wrapping her arms around both of them. They stood together in the growing darkness, their shadow on the wall showing not 3 separate people, but one united family. Whatever happens, James whispered into her hair, know that you and Emma gave me something worth fighting for, worth living for. The gun belt caught the last light of day, its surface reflecting not just the setting sun, but the promise of a tomorrow worth protecting. Tomorrow they would face whatever came their way, but tonight, in this moment, they were simply a family holding on to each other, stronger together than they'd ever been apart. The morning Thomas Reed rode into Silver Creek, Sheriff Wilson's badge caught the first light of dawn, a gleam of authority against the gathering storm. He stood on the boardwalk outside his office, James at his side, watching 3 riders materialize. From the morning mist, like vengeful spirits. "That's them," James said quietly. His hand rested near his gun, but didn't touch it. Thomas Reed in the middle. "Don't know the others," the sheriff nodded grimly. Around them, the town seemed to hold its breath. Most businesses remained closed, their owners and families safely behind locked doors. But not everyone had stayed away. Doc Wilson stood ready. In his office, Martha kept watch from her window, and at the general store, Sarah held Emma close, refusing to hide, while James faced his past. Thomas Reed cut an imposing figure on his blood-bay stallion. Younger than his dead brother, but somehow harder, with eyes like chips of winter ice. His companions flanked him like shadows, rough men who wore their guns low and loose. "Carson!" Reed's voice carried across the empty street. "Show yourself, you murdering coward!" James stepped forward, moving with deliberate calm. "I'm here, Thomas. No need for anyone else to get involved." Reed's laugh was ugly. "Bit late for that, isn't it? You involved everyone the night you killed Clayton. Your brother died because he pulled a gun on an unarmed boy." James's voice remained steady. "I tried to stop him. The boy's testimony proves that." "Testimony," Reed spat. "From some stable brat? Clayton was worth 10 of him. 10 of you." "Clayton was stealing from his workers," James countered. "Threatening their families. The investigations uncovered everything." "Investigation." Reed's hand drifted toward his gun. "I'm not here for investigations. I'm here for justice." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, his badge bright in the morning sun. "Justice has already been served, Mr. Reed. The territorial court has cleared Mr. Carson of all charges. You've got no cause to be here." "No cause?" Reed's voice cracked like a whip. "That man killed my brother." "Your brother died by his own choices," James said quietly. "Just like you're choosing now. Think carefully, Thomas. Is this really what Clayton would want? More bloodshed? More families torn apart?" Something flickered in Reed's ice-cold eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or memory. But before he could respond, one of his companions drew his gun with snake-like speed. "Enough talk!" The shot cracked across the morning silence. James dove and rolled, drawing his own weapon even as Sheriff Wilson's gun barked in response. The street erupted in chaos. Sarah clutched Emma tighter, the baby's cries joining the terrible symphony of gunfire. Through the store window, she watched, in horror as James took cover behind a water trough, bullets splintering the wood around him. One of Reed's men fell, clutching his shoulder where the sheriff's bullet had found him. The other was firing wildly, more concerned with causing chaos than taking aim. But Thomas Reed remained mounted, his focus entirely on James, waiting for his shot. "It doesn't have to end this way," James called out, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "Think about what happens after, Thomas. Think about who else gets hurt. Should have thought about that before you killed my brother. Your brother was going to kill that boy." James's words rang with truth and pain both. "I didn't want to stop him with a bullet. Tried to talk him down, but he wouldn't listen, just like you won't listen now." Something in James's voice, regret perhaps or genuine sorrow, made Reed hesitate. In that moment of pause, Sheriff Wilson's deputy appeared on the roof of the saloon, rifle trained on Reed's remaining gunman. "Drop your weapons!" the sheriff commanded. "It's over!" Reed's companion looked to his boss, then at the rifle aimed at his chest. Slowly, he let his gun fall to the dust, but Thomas Reed wasn't finished. With a cry of rage, he spurred his horse. Forward, gun raised, aiming straight at James. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched, helpless from the store window. James had a clear shot. Could have ended it right there. Instead, he did something that would be talked about in Silver Creek for years to come. He tossed his gun aside and stepped into the open, hands raised. "I'm sorry about Clayton," he said clearly. "Truly. But killing me won't bring him back. All it'll do is destroy another family, another life." Reed's horse danced beneath him, but his gun remained steady. "Why should I care about your life? Not my life." James gestured toward the general store. "There's that baby you hear crying. She's already lost one father, the woman holding her, already lost one husband. They've survived fire and fear and loss. Don't make them survive another." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the scene. Like God's own spotlight, Thomas Reed on his nervous horse, James standing unarmed in the dusty street, and the badge of justice gleaming between them. Slowly, impossibly, Reed's gun hand began to lower. "Clayton always said I was too hot-headed," he muttered. "Said it'd get me killed one day." He looked at James with eyes that had lost their icy edge. "You really tried to save him?" "Yes, and I've regretted every day that I couldn't." The gun dropped to the dust, followed by its owner as Reed dismounted. Sheriff Wilson moved forward quickly, but there was no need. The fight had gone out of Thomas Reed, replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. "Get these men to Doc Wilson," the sheriff ordered his deputies. "Then we'll sort this out properly." As the street began to come back to life, Sarah emerged from the store. Emma still clutched tight against her. James met them halfway, enfolding them both in an embrace that spoke of endings and beginnings, of battles won not with bullets but with truth. "You could have shot him," Sarah whispered against his chest. "Already too many shots fired," James replied softly. "Too many scars. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stand there and let the other man choose to be better." Emma's small hand patted his cheek, and James smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally fall away. The morning sun caught the sheriff's badge one last time, not as a symbol of authority now, but as a promise of justice served, of peace restored, of love triumphant over vengeance. The building plans lay spread across the new kitchen table, corners weighted down with cups of steaming coffee. Sarah traced her finger along the careful drawings that showed not just a house, but a future taking shape on paper. "The nursery here," James said, pointing to a room adjacent to the main bedroom, "with windows facing east so Emma can wake with the sun. And look," he flipped to another page, "the stable will have 6 stalls. Room to grow." Sarah studied his face as he talked, seeing not just the plans he was describing but the dreams behind them. Gone was the haunted look that had shadowed his eyes since Thomas Reed's arrival. In its place was something brighter: hope, purpose, belonging. 6 stalls, she teased. "Planning on starting a ranch?" "Planning on teaching our daughter to ride," he corrected, then paused as the words registered. "I mean, if that's what you want." Sarah's heart swelled at the uncertainty in his voice. After everything, the fire, the revelations, the confrontation with Reed, he still sometimes struggled to believe this life could be his. "James Carson," she said softly, reaching for his hand across the plans. "I want everything with you." The kiss they shared was gentle, full of promise, interrupted only by Emma's delighted squeal from her spot on the floor. They turned to watch as she pulled herself up using a chair, her recent mastery of walking making her bold. "Pa!" she called, reaching for James. The word was new, learned just days after the showdown in the street, as if Emma had been waiting for the last shadows to lift before claiming him fully as her father. James scooped her up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "What do you think, little lady? Ready to see your new room?" Outside, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as the town's men worked to complete the house. The community's support hadn't wavered. If anything, it had grown stronger after James's peaceful resolution with Thomas Reed. Everyone wanted to be part of this story of redemption and renewal. Sarah moved to the doorway, watching as wagons brought more supplies. The house was nearly finished, its fresh-cut timber still fragrant in the summer air. Soon they would have a proper home, built not just with wood and nails, but with love and hope and the strength of starting over. "Martha's bringing lunch for the workers," she said, turning back to James and Emma. And Doc Wilson says he'll help plant the garden once the building's done." "Speaking of gardens," James set Emma down carefully, I've been thinking about that plot behind the house. He retrieved something from his jacket, a package of seeds, but not just any seeds. Sarah recognized them immediately. The same variety of herbs that had grown in Martha's garden, the ones that had helped heal Emma's fever. Thought maybe, he said quietly, we could plant these first. Remember where we started, but grow something new. Sarah took the package, remembering those desperate days when Emma was sick, when James was a stranger who rode through fire to save them. Now here they were, planning gardens and futures, building a life from the ashes of what was lost. We'll plant them together, she decided. All of us. Emma toddled between them, her small hands reaching for the seed package. Above her head, Sarah and James shared a look of pure understanding. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd faced their fears for, these simple moments of family and love and belonging. Through the window, Sarah could see the new stable taking shape, its sturdy frame a promise of horses to come, of Emma learning to ride, of James teaching her the ways of the land he now called home. The building plans on the table showed more than just rooms and walls. They showed a future being built one day at a time. Emma said suddenly, one of her new words patting the plans with a tiny hand. That's right, sweetheart, James replied, his voice rough with emotion. This is home, and we're never leaving it. Sarah leaned into him, their daughter between them, and felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. They had survived fire and fear, secrets and revenge. Now they could focus on building something beautiful from the foundations of their shared strength. Outside, the hammers continued their rhythm, each strike a heartbeat of progress. Inside, a family stood together, holding seeds of hope and plans for tomorrow, ready to plant both in the fertile soil of love. In the quiet hours before dawn, James sat at his desk, pen moving steadily across the pages of his journal. The leather-bound book had been Sarah's gift, given the night after Thomas Reed left town. For the stories you need to tell, she'd said, understanding that some wounds heal best when exposed to light. The nightmares had started again, not of Reed this time, but of fire. In his dreams, he was always too late, the flames too high, Sarah and Emma's voices lost in the inferno's roar. He'd wake, gasping, his back burning with phantom pain from long-healed scars. Writing helps, Sarah had told him, sharing her own experiences of grief after losing Thomas. Gets the shadows out where you can see them. So he wrote, night after night, filling pages with memories both dark and light. The night he found Clayton Reed threatening the stable boy. The years on the run, always looking over his shoulder. And then the night that changed everything, riding through fire to save a woman and child who would become his whole world. A floorboard creaked behind him. Sarah stood in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, Emma drowsy in her arms. "The dream again?" she asked softly. James nodded, closing the journal. "Did I wake you?" "No." Emma was fussing. She came closer, settling into the chair beside his desk. "Want to talk about it?" He looked at their daughter, now peaceful in her mother's embrace, and felt the nightmare's grip loosen. Same as before, the fire, not reaching you in time. Sarah reached for his hand, her touch grounding him in the present. "But you did reach us. You chose to ride into those flames." "Sometimes I think that was the easy part," he admitted. "Fighting fire, facing Reed, that's simple compared to—" He gestured vaguely, struggling to find the words. "Compared to believing you deserve happiness." He met her eyes, struck by how well she understood. "How do you do that? Know exactly what I'm thinking?" "Because I felt the same way after Thomas died. Guilty for surviving, guilty for wanting to be happy again." She shifted Emma gently. "But someone very wise once showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be loved." James touched Emma's soft cheek, remembering the first time she'd called him Pa. "I write about that too," he said, opening the journal again. "Not just the hard things, the good moments, Emma's first steps, the day we finished the house. Every time you look at me like I'm worth believing in." Sarah read a few lines from the open page, her eyes softening at his descriptions of their daily life, simple things made precious by the joy of sharing them. "This is healing too," she said, touching the written words, "remembering that for every nightmare there's a morning, for every scar there's a story of survival." Emma stirred, whimpering slightly. Without thinking, James reached for her, and Sarah transferred their daughter to his arms. The baby settled immediately, her small hand clutching his shirt in sleep. "See," Sarah smiled, "even in her dreams, she knows she's safe with you." James looked down at Emma, then at the journal where he'd documented their journey from strangers to family. The nightmares might never completely fade, but neither would these moments of quiet grace. "I used to think running was the only way to escape the past," he said quietly. "Now I understand. Sometimes you have to stand still long enough to let it catch up. Face it, write it down, learn to live with the scars." Sarah leaned against him, reading over his shoulder as he wrote one final line for the night. "Today I learned that love isn't just about fighting through fire. It's about helping each other heal in the quiet moments after." Outside their window, the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of hope. Another day was beginning, another page waiting to be filled with the story of their life together. And if the nightmares came again, they would face them as they faced everything else, together, stronger for having weathered the storms that brought them to this moment. The family portrait arrived from the photographer in town, carefully wrapped in brown paper. Sarah unfolded it slowly, holding her breath at the sight. There they were, captured in silver and light. James sitting straight-backed in his best shirt, Sarah beside him in her Sunday dress, and Emma perched between them, her dark curls framing a face bright with laughter. "First time I've ever had my picture taken," James admitted, studying the image over her shoulder. "Never stayed in one place long enough before." The photograph caught more than just their faces. It captured the way James's hand rested protectively on Emma's shoulder, the subtle lean of Sarah's body toward his, the sense of belonging that radiated from all three of them. Here was proof, fixed forever in silver nitrate, that they had become something greater than the sum of their broken parts. "Pa! Pa!" Emma's voice carried from outside, where she was discovering the joy of rain puddles after the morning shower. James moved to the window, his face softening at the sight of their daughter splashing with complete abandon. "Better get out there before she soaks through to her skin," Sarah said, smiling at how quickly James headed for the door. Through the window, she watched as he scooped Emma up, both of them laughing as she tried to show him her muddy discoveries. These were the moments that healed them, Sarah realized. Not the grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but the quiet, daily rituals of family life. James teaching Emma to feed the chickens, bath times that somehow left both father and daughter equally wet. Evening stories where Emma insisted on adding her own commentary to every page. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention back outside. Doc Wilson was riding up, his medical bag secured to his saddle. He'd been checking on outlying farms since the fever that had nearly taken Emma had started spreading again. "Everything all right?" Sarah called from the porch. The doctor dismounted, his kind face weary but satisfied. "Better than all right. Last case broke this morning. Seems we've learned a thing or two about treating it, thanks to your experience." James approached, carrying a mud-spattered Emma. "Good to hear, Doc. Stay for coffee?" "Wouldn't say no." The old physician followed them inside, where Sarah already had the pot heating on the stove. "Been meaning to talk to you both anyway." Sarah set out cups while James got Emma cleaned up, the domestic routine now as natural as breathing. When they were all settled, Doc Wilson pulled out a letter. "Got this from a colleague in Helena," he said. "They're looking for someone to help. Set up a horse breeding program at the territorial prison. Good wages, steady work, chance to do some real good. Thought of you, James." James's hand found Sarah's under the table. "Don't know much about breeding horses, Doc, but you know about second chances," the doctor countered. "About helping men find their way back from dark places." He smiled at Emma, who was contentedly drawing on a slate nearby. Besides Helena's growing, good schools opportunities might be worth considering. Sarah watched James process this, saw him wrestling with the idea of returning to the place he'd once fled. But this time would be different. He'd be going back on his own terms, with a family beside him, with purpose instead of fear. Don't think about it, James said finally. Talk it over. After the doctor left, they stood together at the window, watching the sun break through the clouds. Emma had fallen asleep on her father's shoulder, one small hand clutching his shirt in complete trust. What do you think? James asked softly. Sarah touched the family portrait, now proudly displayed on the mantel. I think home isn't about where we are. It's about who we're with. He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't in those early days. When did you get so wise? About the time I fell in love with a man who rode through fire to save us. She leaned into him, careful not to wake Emma. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. Outside, the sun painted their land in shades of promise. The garden they'd planted was thriving, green shoots reaching for the light. Like them, it had grown stronger for having weathered the storm. The ring caught the last light of day as James turned it over in his palm. It was a simple thing, a gold band with a small diamond that had once belonged to his mother. He'd asked Martha Wilson to retrieve it from the bank in Helena, where it had sat in safekeeping all these years, too precious to sell even during his darkest days on the run. "Papa, look!" Emma's voice pulled his attention to where she sat among Martha's flowers, carefully threading daisies into a crooked crown. The word "papa" was still new on her lips, but it came more naturally each day, as if she'd been saving it until she was sure he'd stay. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, quickly pocketing the ring. "Is it for your mama?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small face serious with concentration. "For when she's a princess." James smiled, thinking how Sarah already was a queen in his eyes, ruling their home with grace and strength, building a kingdom from the ashes of what was lost. Now he just had to find the courage to make it official. The sound of hoofbeats announced Sarah's return from town. She'd been helping Doc Wilson with his rounds, learning about healing herbs and simple medicines. The knowledge that had helped save Emma during the fever was now being passed on to help others. "There are my favorite people," she called, dismounting. Gracefully, Emma ran to her daisy crown, wobbling. "Mama, I made you pretty!" Sarah knelt to accept the flower crown, letting Emma place it carefully on her head. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Thank you." Over their daughter's head, her eyes met James's, and his heart skipped like it had that first night in the fire. How had he gotten so lucky? What had he done to deserve this second chance at happiness? "Emma, honey!" Martha called from her porch. "Come help me get those cookies out of the oven." Their daughter's face lit up. After a questioning glance at her parents and their approving nods, she rushed off, leaving James and Sarah alone in the golden evening light. "You look beautiful," he said softly, touching the daisy crown, "like something out of a fairy tale." Sarah laughed. "The kind where the princess gets rescued from a fire by a handsome cowboy, the kind where two broken people help each other become whole again." He took her hand, drawing her closer. "Sarah, I've been thinking, a dangerous pastime." She teased, but her eyes were soft with understanding. "I'm not running anymore," he said quietly. "Not from my past, not from happiness, not from the love I feel for you and Emma." His hand found the ring in his pocket. "I know I'm not the man you expected to build a life with. My name still carries shadows, and this path won't always be easy." "James," she interrupted gently, "the easiest path isn't always the right one. Sometimes you have to ride through fire to find your way home." He went down on one knee then, holding up his mother's ring. "Sarah Mitchell, you and Emma are my home, my heart, my reason for staying when every instinct said to run. Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears that caught the evening, light like diamonds. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been waiting all these years just for this moment. When they kissed, it was sweet with the promise of tomorrows. A small squeal of delight broke them apart. Emma stood watching them, cookie in hand, her face glowing with joy. She ran to them and they caught her up in their embrace, a family circle complete. "Papa's staying forever?" she asked, looking between them with solemn eyes. "Forever and always." "Little love," James promised, his voice rough with emotion. Martha appeared in her doorway, wiping happy tears with her apron. "Well, it's about time. Wait till I tell the doc. He'll be over the moon. This calls for more than cookies. Come inside, all of you. We need to celebrate properly." As they followed Martha inside, James caught Sarah's hand, feeling the warm metal of his mother's ring. This was what redemption felt like, he realized. Not the absence of past shadows, but the presence of so much light that the shadows no longer held power. Emma skipped ahead of them, still wearing her crown of daisies, singing a made-up song about cookies and princesses and papas who stayed. Forever. Sarah leaned into James's side, and he marveled at how perfectly they fit together. Two souls who had found each other through fire and fear, building a love strong enough to light the way home. 1 year to the day after the fire, the rebuilt homestead stood proud against the Montana sky. No trace remained of the destruction that had once blackened this land. The gardens flourished, the stable held strong horses, and the house rang with the sounds of family life. Sarah stood in the doorway of their home, watching James teach Emma to ride her new pony. The little girl sat straight and fearless in her tiny saddle, her father's hands steady on the lead rope as they circled the paddock. Fresh painted fence rails gleamed white in the morning sun, a striking contrast to the memory of ash and flame. "Look, Mama!" Emma called, waving with the confidence of a child who knew she was perfectly safe. "I'm riding like Papa." The pride in James's face made Sarah's heart swell. He'd spent weeks gentling the pony, ensuring it was ready for their daughter. Now he walked beside them, offering quiet instructions and constant praise, building Emma's confidence as carefully as he'd rebuilt their home. Inside, a fresh-baked pie cooled on the windowsill, apple James's favorite. The kitchen walls held rows of preserved fruits and vegetables, testament to their first successful harvest. Everything spoke of permanence, of roots sunk deep into fertile soil. Martha Wilson arrived with her basket of herbs, letting herself in through the garden gate as she did most mornings. The two women had grown closer over the past year, sharing recipes and remedies, turning Sarah's initial interest in healing into something approaching expertise. "They're at it early," Martha observed, watching James and Emma. She couldn't wait, Sarah smiled. "Been up since dawn, asking when she could ride." Just like her father, Martha set her basket on the porch rail. "Speaking of which, did you tell him yet?" Sarah's hand drifted to her stomach, where the newest blessing of their life was just beginning to show. "Tonight, after Emma's asleep, he'll be over the moon," Martha predicted. "That man was born to be a father." As if hearing them, James looked up and caught Sarah's eye. His smile still made her heart skip, still held the warmth that had drawn her to him from the beginning. In his eyes, she saw not just love, but the contentment of a man who had finally found his place in the world. Emma's pony stopped for a drink at the water trough, and James lifted her down with practiced ease. She ran to Sarah, her face glowing with excitement. "Did you see, Mama? Did you see how good I rode?" "I saw, sweetheart." Sarah smoothed her daughter's windblown hair. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman." "Just like her mother," James said, coming up behind them. He kissed Sarah's cheek, then bent to whisper in her ear, "You're glowing today, Mrs. Carson." The name still gave her a thrill. They'd married in the spring, a simple ceremony in the town church with Emma as their flower girl. The whole community had turned out to celebrate. Even Thomas Reed had sent a telegram of congratulations from Helena. Martha brought fresh herbs, Sarah said, changing the subject before her secret could burst forth. "And the pie should be cool enough to eat." apple. James's eyes lit up hopefully. Would I make anything else for my husband's birthday? They gathered around the kitchen table, this little family that had been forged in fire and tempered by love. Emma insisted on saying grace, her small voice solemn as she thanked God for ponies and pie and parents who loved her. Later, after Martha had gone home, and Emma was tucked in bed with dreams of horses dancing in her head, Sarah and James stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of promise. "Happy birthday," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it over her growing secret. James went still, then turned to her with wondering eyes. "Really?" She nodded, tears of joy spilling over as he pulled her close. They stood together in the gathering dusk, his hand cradling their future, while their daughter slept peaceful dreams nearby. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For the pie?" she teased. "For everything. For believing in second chances. For helping me build a life I never dreamed I could have." Inside their solid home, the clock ticked away, peaceful seconds, marking time not in moments lost, but in joys yet to come. The rebuilt homestead stood strong against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warmth and welcome, a beacon of hope for all who had ever needed to believe in the power of love to rise from ashes. 20 years later, Emma Carson sat in the attic of the family home, her mother's old diary open in her lap. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through the window, catching on the gold of her wedding ring. She was Emma Mitchell Cooper now, though she'd always be a Carson in her heart. The diary's pages were worn soft with age, their edges gently foxed, but her mother's elegant handwriting remained clear. Emma had found it while gathering mementos for her own expected child, wanting to pass down the story of how their family came to be. "I thought I might find you up here," her father's voice came from the stairs. James Carson's hair had gone silver, but he still moved with the same quiet strength that had carried him through fire to save them so long ago. "Just reading Mama's account of the night you found us," Emma said, making room for him on the old trunk she was using as a seat. She wrote everything down. James settled beside her, his eyes soft with memory. "Your mother always said some stories were too important to trust to memory alone." Emma turned a page, finding the entry from the day after the fire. "She wrote about how you wouldn't let the burns on your back be treated until you knew I was going to be all right." She looked up at her father. "I never knew that. There was a lot you were too young to remember," he said quietly. "But every bit of pain was worth it, to have you and your mother in my life." Emma's hand drifted to her growing belly. "I've been thinking about that night a lot lately, about courage and second chances, and how love can come to you in the most unexpected ways. Worried about becoming a parent yourself." "A little," she admitted. "I want to be as good a mother as Mama was. As good a parent as you both were." James took the diary gently, looking at Sarah's familiar script. "You know what your mother would say, that being a good parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being there every day, choosing love over a fear, choosing to stay even when things get hard." Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and horses that had always meant safety to her. "Tell me again about that night, about riding through the fire." "You've heard that story 100 times, he chuckled. "I want my baby to know it too, want them to understand where they came from." James was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I wasn't looking for redemption that night," he said finally. "Wasn't looking for love or family or any of the blessings I found. I just knew I couldn't ride past someone in need, couldn't let fear of what might happen stop me from doing what needed to be done. And it changed everything. It changed everything." He agreed. "But you know what really made the difference? It wasn't riding through the fire. It was choosing to stay afterward, choosing to face my past instead of running from it, choosing to believe I deserved the love your mother offered." Emma touched a page where her mother had pressed a dried flower, a daisy from the crown she'd worn the day James proposed. You taught me that too, that love is a choice we make every day, that family isn't just about blood, but about who we choose to become together. Through the attic window, they could see Sarah in the garden below, teaching Emma's young husband David about the healing herbs she still grew. The garden had flourished over the years, becoming known throughout the territory for its medicinal plants. Your mother sees you up here going through old memories. She'll say you should be resting, James smiled. Probably, Emma agreed, but made no move to leave. Instead, she opened the diary to another page, one that held her mother's account of the day James had first taught her to ride. I want to remember everything, Papa. Want to write it all down for my child, just like Mama did for me. James wrapped an arm around his daughter, both of them surrounded by the tangible pieces of their family's history. The diary, the dried flowers, the memories preserved in ink and love. Below, Sarah's laugh floated up through the window. A sound as precious now as it had been all those years ago. Then we'll remember together, James said softly, and add new chapters to the story as they come. The phoenix quilt spread across Emma's bed, its intricate pattern telling a story in cloth and thread. Created by the women of Silver Creek for Sarah and James's wedding, each patch held meaning. Flames rendered in red and orange, a black horse leaping through fire, healing herbs stitched in green, and at the center a rising phoenix surrounded by a heart. Now, 25 years after that fateful night of fire and rescue, the quilt would welcome another generation. Emma lay beneath it, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms, while Sarah and James stood at the bedside, their eyes bright with tears of joy. "She has your eyes, Emma," Sarah said softly, touching her granddaughter's tiny hand. "The same ones that looked up at James that night, somehow knowing he'd keep you safe. And your mother's strength," James added, his voice rough with emotion. "Fighting through fever then, just like you fought through everything life threw at you since." Emma smiled tiredly. "We decided on a name," she said, looking at her husband David, who nodded encouragingly. "We're calling her Sarah Rose. Sarah for the grandmother who never gave up hope, and Rose because they bloom even after fire has swept through." The baby stirred, opening eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of generations. James reached down, letting his granddaughter grasp his weathered finger. "Hello, little Sarah Rose," he whispered. "Welcome to a family built on second chances." Through the window, the garden Sarah had planted all those years ago bloomed bright and strong. The herbs still helped heal the sick, their medicine made more potent by the love and wisdom passed down through careful teachings. Martha Wilson was gone now, but her legacy lived on in every plant, every remedy, every life touched by the healing that had begun in her small garden. "Remember what Martha used to say?" Sarah asked, arranging the quilt more snugly around Mother. "And child, that sometimes the hardest storms bring the sweetest flowers?" "She was right," Emma said, looking around at her family. "About that and so many things." David brought in tea made from herbs Sarah had grown and dried. The familiar ritual of sharing this comfort reminded them all of other nights, other healings, other moments when love had proved stronger than fear. "Tell her the story, Papa," Emma said suddenly. "About the night you saved us. I want her to hear it in your voice, even if she's too young to remember." James settled into the chair by the bed, his silver hair catching the late afternoon light. "It was a night when fire devoured the prairie," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a tale often told, but never diminished. "When a man who thought he had nothing left to give found something worth fighting for." As he spoke, Sarah moved to stand behind his chair, her hands resting on his shoulders. Their touch still held the same tenderness it had all those years ago, when a widow and a wanderer discovered that love could rise from ashes, that redemption could come on horseback through flames. That family wasn't just about blood, but about the choices we make and the hearts we choose to heal. The baby drifted to sleep, safe in the circle of her mother's arms, beneath the quilt that told their story. Outside, horses grazed in green pastures that had once been scorched earth. The stable James had built housed not just their own horses now, but also those he helped gentle for others, teaching men from the territorial prison about patience, trust, and the healing power of caring for another living thing. Their legacy lived on not just in Emma and her child, but in every person who heard their story and found the courage to believe in second chances. In every soul who learned that sometimes love requires us to ride through fire, to face our fears, to choose hope over history. And that's how our family began. James finished softly, watching his granddaughter sleep. Not with blood or birth, but with a choice made in flames. With a man who decided to stop running, a woman who chose to trust, and a baby who taught them both that love is stronger than fear. And it's how our family continues, Emma added, holding her daughter closer. Through the stories we tell, the love we share, the courage we choose every day. Sarah bent to kiss James's cheek, then Emma's forehead, then her granddaughter's tiny hand. Through fire and fear, she said quietly, through loss and love, through endings that become beginnings. We ride on together, they finished in unison, their voices joining in the words that had become their family's motto. Outside, the sun set in shades of amber and rose, painting the sky in colors that no longer brought memories of flame, but of hope, of love, of family rising like a phoenix, generation after generation, choosing again and again to believe in the power of riding through fire to find their way home.